What if I told you that the very thing you're most afraid to look at within yourself is the key to your freedom? That the darkness you've been running from your entire life contains the greatest treasure you could ever imagine? Carl Jung, one of the most profound minds in psychology, discovered something that shook the foundations of how we understand human nature. He found that within each of us lives a shadow, a hidden realm containing everything we've rejected, denied, or pushed away about ourselves. And here's what will disturb you. This shadow isn't just influencing your life, it's controlling it in ways you can't even see. But what happens when you finally turn around and face this darkness? What occurs in the depths of your psyche when you stop running and start embracing what you've always feared? The answer will transform everything you thought you knew about yourself. In the next few minutes, you're going to discover the 5 profound transformations that occur when you finally confront your shadow. You'll learn why most people live their entire lives as prisoners of their own rejected parts, and how the very qualities you despise in yourself might be your greatest source of power. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why Jung called this process the most important work a human being can do. But I must warn you, once you see what I'm about to show you, you can never unsee it. Your relationship with yourself, with others, and with reality itself will never be the same. The first transformation that occurs when you face your dark side is the end of your internal war. For most of your life, you've been fighting a battle you didn't even know you were fighting. Jung understood that the human psyche is like a house divided against itself. On one side, we have our conscious personality, the version of ourselves we present to the world, the person we think we are. On the other side, lurking in the basement of our consciousness, lives everything we've deemed unacceptable about ourselves. Imagine a successful businessman who prides himself on being rational, controlled, and professional. Yet every night he finds himself inexplicably drawn to violent movies, aggressive music, or heated arguments online. He doesn't understand why he feels this strange attraction to chaos when his conscious mind values order. What's happening is that his shadow, the wild, untamed part of himself that he's rejected, is demanding expression. The more he denies this aspect of himself, the more it controls him from the shadows. This is the exhausting reality for most people. We're constantly using our energy to keep our shadow locked away, like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. It takes tremendous force, and the moment we relax our guard, it explodes to the surface in unexpected ways. We might find ourselves snapping at loved ones, making impulsive decisions that go against our values, or feeling mysteriously attracted to people or situations that seem completely contrary to who we think we are. But when you finally face your shadow, something miraculous happens. The war ends. You stop wasting energy fighting yourself and start channeling that power toward integration. Jung called this process individuation, the journey toward wholeness. When the businessman finally acknowledges his need for wildness and finds healthy outlets for this energy, perhaps through competitive sports, creative expression, or passionate advocacy for causes he believes in, he becomes a more complete, authentic, and powerful human being. The psychological consequence of this integration cannot be overstated. You gain access to energy reserves you never knew you had. You stop feeling like you're swimming against an invisible current. Life becomes easier, not because your challenges disappear, but because you're no longer fighting yourself while trying to face them. The second transformation is the end of unconscious projection, and this might be the most liberating realization of your life. Jung discovered that we tend to see in others what we refuse to see in ourselves. The qualities that trigger us most intensely in other people are almost always reflections of our own disowned aspects. Consider a woman who becomes absolutely enraged by selfish people. She can't stand anyone who puts their own needs first, who speaks up for themselves, or who seems to live without considering others. She prides herself on being selfless, always putting others before herself, always sacrificing her own desires for the greater good. But what she doesn't realize is that her rage toward selfish people is actually rage toward her own suppressed selfishness, the part of her that desperately wants to say no, to prioritize her own needs, to stop giving herself away. This woman is projecting her shadow onto others. Every time she encounters someone who embodies the qualities she's rejected in herself, she experiences an intense emotional reaction. It's as if the universe is holding up a mirror, showing her exactly what she needs to integrate, but instead of looking at herself, she's attacking the mirror. Jung observed that our projections are like invisible chains, binding us to the very people and situations we claim to despise. We become obsessed with fighting against in others what we won't acknowledge in ourselves. We attract relationships and circumstances that trigger our shadow because the psyche is always seeking wholeness. The universe conspires to bring us face to face with our disowned parts until we finally reclaim them. When you face your shadow and own these projected qualities, something extraordinary happens. The people who used to trigger you suddenly lose their power over you. You stop being a victim of your emotional reactions because you understand what's really happening. That selfish person is no longer your enemy. They become your teacher, showing you a part of yourself that needs integration. More profoundly, you begin to see other people as they actually are, not as screens for your projections. Your relationships become authentic instead of being unconscious attempts to work out your internal conflicts. You develop genuine compassion because you recognize in others the same struggles you faced within yourself. The third transformation might disturb you because it reveals how much of your life has been lived in service of an illusion. When you face your shadow, you discover that your carefully constructed identity, the person you think you are, is only a fraction of your true self. Jung called this constructed identity the persona, borrowing from the Latin word for mask. Your persona is necessary for functioning in society. It's the professional face you wear at work, the loving face you show your family, the confident face you present to friends. But problems arise when you mistake the mask for your true self. Most people become so identified with their persona that they forget they're wearing a mask at all. Think of a person who has built their entire identity around being nice. They're always agreeable, always helpful, never confrontational. Everyone sees them as the epitome of kindness. But when they finally face their shadow, they discover a fierce, angry, sometimes even cruel part of themselves that they've been desperately trying to hide. This revelation can be terrifying because it threatens everything they thought they knew about themselves. However, this dark night of the soul is actually a rebirth. When you acknowledge your shadow, you don't lose your capacity for kindness. You gain access to authentic kindness that comes from choice rather than compulsion. The person who discovers their inner aggression doesn't become a monster. They become someone who can set healthy boundaries, stand up for themselves and others, and express their truth with power and conviction. Jung understood that true strength comes not from denying our darkness, but from integrating it consciously. When you own your capacity for aggression, you gain access to healthy assertiveness. When you acknowledge your selfishness, you develop the ability to take care of yourself so you can genuinely care for others. When you embrace your jealousy, you gain access to healthy competition and the drive for self-improvement. This integration creates what Jung called psychological wholeness. You become a complete human being rather than a partial person pretending to be whole. You gain access to the full spectrum of human experience and emotion, which means you can respond to life's challenges with the full range of your capabilities. The fourth transformation reveals the secret source of creative and spiritual power that most people never access. Jung discovered that the shadow contains not just our negative qualities, but also our unrealized potential, what he called the golden shadow. These are the positive qualities we've disowned because they seem too dangerous, too powerful, or too different from our constructed identity. Consider someone who has always seen themselves as practical and realistic. They've rejected their imaginative, artistic, mystical side as impractical nonsense. But within their shadow lies a tremendous creative force. Their unlived life as an artist, visionary, or spiritual seeker. When they finally face this aspect of themselves, they don't become less practical. They become practical and creative, grounded and visionary. This is why many people experience a surge of creative energy when they begin shadow work. They're not just dealing with their negative traits, they're reclaiming disowned gifts and talents. The businessman might discover he's also a poet. The quiet librarian might find she's also a fierce activist. The rational scientist might uncover a mystical nature that enhances rather than contradicts their logical mind. Jung observed that the most powerful and influential people throughout history were those who had integrated their shadows most completely. They had access to the full range of human capabilities because they hadn't rejected any part of themselves. They could be gentle and fierce, logical and intuitive, humble and confident, depending on what the situation required. This integration also opens you to what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold paradoxes and contradictions without needing to resolve them. You become comfortable with ambiguity and complexity because you've learned to embrace these qualities within yourself. This psychological flexibility allows you to navigate life's challenges with unprecedented wisdom and creativity. Before we continue with the fifth and most profound transformation, I want to acknowledge something. If you're still here, it means you're someone who isn't satisfied with surface-level understanding. You're seeking the deeper truths that can actually transform your life. If this resonates with you, I invite you to subscribe and join a community of people committed to this inner work. Your engagement helps these ideas reach others who are ready for this level of truth. The fifth and most profound transformation that occurs when you face your shadow is the awakening of authentic love, both for yourself and others. This might seem counterintuitive. How can embracing your darkness lead to love? But Jung understood something that most people miss. True love is only possible when you've made peace with the totality of who you are. Most of what we call love is actually conditional acceptance. We love the good parts of ourselves and others while rejecting or trying to change the difficult parts. This creates a fundamental split in our capacity for love. We're always holding back, always protecting ourselves from the parts we find unacceptable. But when you've faced your own shadow, when you've looked at your capacity for cruelty, selfishness, jealousy, and pettiness and learned to hold it with compassion, something extraordinary happens. You develop the capacity for unconditional self-acceptance. Not because you're perfect, but because you've learned that your imperfections are part of your humanity, not obstacles to it. This self-acceptance then radiates outward. When you've made peace with your own darkness, you're no longer threatened by the darkness in others. You can see their struggles with compassion because you recognize them as variations of your own struggles. Your relationships become spaces of genuine acceptance rather than projects of mutual improvement. Jung observed that people who had done this work became naturally healing presences in the world. Not because they tried to fix others, but because their acceptance of their own wholeness created a field of permission for others to be whole as well. They became what he called wounded healers, people whose own integration of pain and darkness gave them the capacity to hold space for others' healing. This transformation also awakens what Jung called the religious instinct, not necessarily belief in a particular religion, but a direct experience of the sacred dimension of existence. When you've integrated your shadow, you've essentially performed an act of profound self-love. You've chosen wholeness over perfection, truth over image, authenticity over approval. This act of radical self-acceptance opens you to experiencing the sacred within yourself and recognizing it in all of life. Many people report that after integrating their shadow, they feel a deep sense of coming home to themselves. The exhausting project of trying to be someone other than who they are finally ends. They experience what Jung called the treasure hard to attain, not because it was difficult to find, but because it required the courage to look where they most feared to look. But here's what might surprise you most of all. Facing your shadow doesn't make you a darker person. It makes you a more conscious person. When you own your capacity for harm, you become less likely to cause unconscious harm. When you acknowledge your selfish impulses, you become more genuinely generous. When you embrace your anger, you become more truly peaceful. This happens because consciousness transforms everything it touches. The shadow is only dangerous when it operates unconsciously. When you bring it into the light of awareness, it becomes a source of power, creativity, and authentic strength. Jung spent his entire career studying the human psyche, and he concluded that this work of shadow integration was the most important task of human development. Not because it makes life easier. In many ways, it makes life more complex. But because it makes life real. It transforms you from a person who is afraid of themselves into someone who has the courage to be human. The path of shadow integration isn't easy. It requires tremendous courage to look at the parts of yourself you've spent a lifetime avoiding. It demands that you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. It asks you to trade the safety of your illusions for the uncertainty of truth. But on the other side of this courage lies a freedom that most people never experience. The freedom to be yourself completely, the freedom to love without conditions, the freedom to create from your authentic center rather than from what you think others want to see. Jung believed that the world's problems stem from individuals who haven't done this inner work, people who project their shadows onto others, who live divided against themselves, who mistake their masks for their true faces. He saw shadow integration not just as personal development, but as a necessity for the evolution of human consciousness. When you face your dark side, you don't just transform yourself. You contribute to the healing of the collective shadow, the accumulated darkness that humanity has refused to face. You become part of the solution rather than an unconscious participant in the problem. As we come to the end of this exploration, I want to leave you with a question that Jung himself posed. What if the very thing you're most afraid to face about yourself is exactly what the world needs you to integrate? What if your shadow contains not just your personal demons, but your unrealized gifts to humanity? The work of facing your shadow is ultimately the work of becoming whole. It's the journey from living as a fragment of yourself to embodying your full potential. It's the path from unconscious reaction to conscious response, from conditional love to unconditional acceptance, from hiding your truth to living it courageously. Your shadow has been waiting for you your entire life. It's been calling to you through your reactions, your attractions, your inexplicable urges and mysterious resistances. It's been trying to get your attention through every person who triggers you, every situation that reveals your hidden aspects, every moment when you've felt disconnected from your authentic self. The invitation is always there. The only question is whether you have the courage to turn around and face what's been following you all along. Because when you do, when you finally embrace the totality of who you are, you don't just change your life. You step into the fullness of your human potential and become a force for healing in a world that desperately needs people who have the courage to be whole.